The son asked his mother to dig up his grave a year after the funeral, Part 1. Margaret Taylor sat quietly by her window. The morning sun touched her wrinkled face. It had been 1 year since they buried her only son, William. The house felt empty without his laughter. His room remained untouched, just as he left it. The postman arrived at 9, just like every day. Margaret walked slowly to collect the mail. Bills, flyers, and a strange envelope with no return address. She knew that handwriting anywhere. Her heart skipped a beat. With shaking hands, she opened the letter. "Dear Mum," it began. Margaret had to sit down. These were William's words, written before his death. "If you are reading this, it's been 1 year since my funeral. I need you to do something that will sound mad. I need you to dig up my grave. There's something there you must find. I know this is a lot to ask, but please, trust me one last time. All my love, William." The teacup slipped from Margaret's hand and shattered on the floor. How could this be? William had been sick for months before the cancer took him. He was always thinking ahead, planning things. But this was beyond understanding. Margaret read the letter 10 more times that day. Each time she felt sure it was really from William. The way he wrote his W's, the little heart he always drew next to love, these were things only William did. That night she couldn't sleep. The letter sat on her bedside table. Was her grief making her crazy? Should she just throw the letter away and try to move on? But what if William really had left something important? The next morning, Margaret called her daughter, Elizabeth. "I need you to come over," she said. "There's something you need to see." Elizabeth arrived looking worried. At 35, she had her father's practical nature. "Mum, are you feeling all right? You sound strange." Margaret handed her the letter without a word. Elizabeth read it twice, her face growing pale. "This is sick," she finally said. "Someone is playing a horrible joke on you." "It's William's handwriting," Margaret insisted. "Look at the way he writes. No one could copy that perfectly." Elizabeth shook her head. "Mum, William is gone. Someone must have found a sample of his writing and copied it. This is cruel. But what if it's real? What if he left something important?" Elizabeth put her hand on her mother's shoulder. "Listen to yourself. You're talking about digging up your son's grave because of a letter that someone sent to upset you." Margaret knew how it sounded. Mad. Desperate. The actions of a woman who couldn't accept her son was gone. But something deep inside told her this was really William's final request. That night, Margaret dreamed of William as a little boy. In the dream, he was digging in their garden, looking for treasure. "Sometimes, Mum," he said with soil on his cheeks, "you have to dig deep to find what really matters." When she woke up, Margaret knew what she had to do. She would find a way to honor her son's last wish, no matter how impossible it seemed. She would need help. The cemetery wouldn't just let her dig up a grave. There would be forms, permissions, maybe even court orders. Margaret looked at the photograph of William on her wall. His kind eyes seemed to be watching her, waiting to see if she would be brave enough to take this journey. "I don't know what you left behind," she whispered to the picture, "but I promise I'll find it." She picked up the phone and called James, William's old friend who had become a lawyer. If anyone could help her navigate this impossible task, it would be him. As the phone rang, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in a year: purpose. Whatever William had hidden, she would uncover it. This wasn't goodbye anymore. This was a new chapter in their story, Part 2. James Bell listened carefully as Margaret explained the letter. His office was small but tidy, with law books lining the walls. He had been William's best friend since school days, and now he sat across from William's mother, trying to make sense of her unusual request. "Margaret, what you're asking isn't simple," James said gently. "There are strict laws about disturbing burial sites. We would need special permission, and we'd have to prove there's a good reason." Margaret pushed William's letter across the "This is my reason. My son asked me to do this." James read the letter twice. His face showed confusion, then deep thought. It's definitely William's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere after all those study notes we shared. So you believe me? Margaret asked, hope in her voice. I believe William wrote this. What I don't understand is why. James leaned back in his chair. Did he mention anything before he died? Any hint about something he might have left behind? Margaret shook her head. Nothing. But William was always different. Always thinking ahead, planning things others wouldn't consider. James nodded slowly. That's true. Remember when he bought those concert tickets 6 months in advance because he calculated exactly when they'd sell out? For the first time in months, Margaret smiled at a memory of William that didn't bring pain. He was always right about those things. James tapped the letter thoughtfully. I'll help you, Margaret, but I need to warn you, this won't be easy. It will take time, money, and there will be questions. Hard questions about your mental state, about William's mental state when he wrote this. I don't care, Margaret said firmly. My son asked this of me. I won't let him down. Over the next weeks, James filed paperwork with the cemetery board, the local council, and the health department. Each time they faced the same responses: confusion, concern, and polite refusals. Elizabeth remained strongly against the idea. Mom, this is madness. You're letting your grief push you into something destructive. Your brother asked me to do this, Margaret insisted. My brother was dying of cancer. He might not have been thinking clearly, Elizabeth shot back. Margaret's neighbors began to whisper. Some stopped visiting. Her friend Dorothy from the garden club called one day. Margaret, dear, we're all worried about you, Dorothy said over. Perhaps you should talk to someone professional. Margaret stopped telling people about her mission. She focused on working with James, who remained her steadfast ally despite his own doubts. 3 months after receiving the letter, James called with news. The cemetery board has agreed to a hearing. We can present our case next month. Thank you, James, Margaret said, tears filling her eyes. William would be so grateful. Don't thank me yet, James warned. This is just the first step. The night before the hearing, Margaret couldn't sleep. She went to William's room and sat on his bed. Everything remained as it was. His books on the shelf, his old football trophies, the picture of him and James at university graduation. What did you leave behind? She whispered to the empty room. What was so important that you would ask for this? Margaret remembered William's final weeks, how clear-minded he had been, even as the cancer took its toll. How he had organized all his affairs, made peace with friends, helped Elizabeth plan for her children's education. William had faced death with remarkable calm. Whatever he had hidden in his grave, Margaret was now certain was no meaningless gesture. It was something important, something worth finding. At dawn, Margaret dressed carefully for the hearing. As Dee, she pinned William's old university pin to her jacket. She felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened today, she was doing what her son had asked. She was keeping her promise. I'm coming, William, she whispered. Whatever you left for me to find, I'm coming. Part 3. The cemetery board meeting took place in a small room with wood-paneled walls. 5 serious-looking people sat behind a long table. Margaret and James sat opposite them, feeling the weight of their stares. Mrs. Taylor, began the chairman, Mr. Bentley, we've reviewed your unusual request to exhume your son's remains. In 30 years working with this cemetery, I've never heard such a request from a family member. Margaret sat straight in her chair. I understand how strange this sounds. Strange isn't the word I would use, said Mrs. Porter, the only woman on the board. Disturbing might be more accurate. Many would question your mental state. James stepped in. My client is perfectly sound of mind. She's simply honoring her son's final request. Mr. Bentley held up William's letter, which Margaret had submitted with their application. This letter, supposedly written by your son before his death, is your only evidence. How do we know this is genuine? I've included samples of William's other writing for comparison, James replied, and 3 character witnesses who can confirm it's his handwriting. The board members exchanged looks. Mr. Bentley sighed. Even if this letter is genuine, We must consider the public interest. Opening graves sets a concerning precedent. My son was a medical researcher, Margaret said quietly. He worked on new treatments until his final days. If he left something in that grave, it must be important. The board asked more questions for nearly an hour. Margaret answered honestly, her voice never wavering. Finally, they asked Margaret and James to wait outside while they discussed. In the hallway, Margaret stared out a window at the cemetery grounds in the distance. "William is out there waiting," she said. James squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens, you've honored him by trying." After 45 minutes, they were called back in. Mr. Bentley's expression gave nothing away. "Mrs. Taylor, we've reached a decision. While we find your request unusual, we've been moved by your dedication to your son's wishes. We will permit a controlled exhumation with strict conditions." Margaret gasped softly. "The procedure will be supervised by cemetery officials and a police officer. No photographs will be permitted. If nothing unusual is found, the grave will be immediately restored and no further requests will be considered." "Thank you," Margaret whispered. "When?" "Next Tuesday, 7 a.m., before regular cemetery hours. We wish to be discreet." As they left the building, Margaret felt lightheaded. After months of fighting, it was actually happening. "We did it, James. We really did it." "William would be proud," James said. "He always said you were the strongest person he knew." When Margaret told Elizabeth about the decision, her daughter was horrified. "This is a mistake, Mum. You're disturbing William's rest for what? Some mystery he created while he was sick? And afraid?" "I have to do this," Margaret said firmly. Elizabeth shook her head. "I won't be part of it. I can't watch this." The night before the exhumation, Margaret barely slept. She wondered if she had gone too far. What if there was nothing there? What if William had written the letter during a moment of confusion? No, she thought. William had been clear-minded until the end. This was real. At dawn, Margaret dressed in warm clothes. The autumn morning was cold and misty. James picked her up, his face serious. "Are you ready?" he asked. Margaret nodded. "Ready." At the cemetery, a small group waited. The cemetery director, a police officer, and 2 workers with shovels. No one spoke much as they walked to William's grave. Margaret stood back as the workers began to dig. Each shovel of dirt made her heart beat faster. After what seemed like forever, they reached the coffin. "Mrs. Taylor," called Mr. Bentley, "would you like to look away for this part?" Margaret shook her head. "No. I need to see everything." The workers carefully opened the coffin lid. Margaret held her breath, not knowing what she would see. Part 4. The cemetery workers slowly opened William's coffin. Margaret held her breath. Everyone leaned forward, unsure what they would find. William's body was there just as they had buried him a year ago. He looked peaceful, like he was sleeping. But something was different. Tucked beside him was a small silver case, something that had not been there during the funeral. "What is that?" the police officer asked, pointing at the case. Margaret stepped forward. "I don't know, but this must be what William wanted me to find." Mr. Bentley looked nervous. "We should check if it's dangerous before touching it." "My son would never leave anything harmful," Margaret said firmly. She reached into the coffin and carefully took the silver case. It was about the size of a book, cool to the touch, and had a small keypad on the front. "It's locked," James observed. "Did William give you any codes or numbers that might open it?" Margaret thought hard. "No, nothing like that." The police officer stepped closer. "Mrs. Taylor, I should take that for examination." "No," Margaret said, holding the case tightly. "William left this for me, not for the police." James put his hand on her shoulder. "Margaret, maybe we should let them check it first." Margaret looked down at the case. On the top, she noticed something etched into the metal, a small heart, just like the one William always drew on his letters. Below it were the numbers, 110682. "I know the code," she whispered. "It's my birthday." Before anyone could stop her, Margaret typed in the numbers. The case made a soft clicking sound and opened. Inside was a USB drive, a small notebook with William's handwriting, and a letter sealed in an envelope with "For Mum" written on it. The police officer looked relieved. "Just some personal effects, Mr. Bentley nodded. "Well, Mrs. Taylor, you found what your son left for you. We'll now proceed with reburying him." Margaret clutched the case. "Yes, of course." As the workers prepared to close the coffin, Margaret took one last look at her son. "Thank you, William," she whispered. "I found it." Back at home, Margaret sat at her kitchen table. James made tea while she carefully opened the letter from the case. "Dear Mum," the letter began. "If you're reading this, you did exactly what I knew you would. You trusted me, even when everyone else thought you were crazy. I'm sorry for putting you through this." Margaret wiped away tears as she continued, reading. "The USB drive contains all my research on a new treatment for the cancer that took me. My official research team abandoned this approach months before I died, calling it too experimental. But I continued in secret, and I found something promising." Margaret looked up at James in shock. He was still working on a cure. "The notebook has all my notes that weren't on the computer. Take everything to Dr. Robert Fisher at Central Hospital. He was my mentor, and he'll understand what I found. I couldn't leave this with anyone else. Too many people wanted my research to fail, because it threatened their expensive treatments." Margaret's hands trembled. "He hid his research in his own grave to protect it. I know this seems extreme, Mum, but I had to make sure this knowledge wasn't lost. This treatment could help thousands of people with the same cancer. You've always been the bravest person I know. That's why I trusted you with this. All my love, William." James sat down heavily. Incredible. Even after death, he was trying to help others. Margaret looked at the USB drive and notebook. "We need to find this Dr. Fisher right away." For the first time since William died, Margaret felt purpose flowing through her. Her son's last wish wasn't just a goodbye, it was a mission. His work would continue through her. Part 5. Dr. Robert Fisher looked up from William's notebook with wide eyes. His office at Central Hospital was filled with medical journals and awards, showing his long career in cancer research. Margaret and James sat across from him, waiting anxiously. "I can hardly believe what I'm seeing," Dr. Fisher said, removing his glasses. "William was working on this in secret?" Margaret nodded. "He said his official team abandoned this approach." Dr. Fisher sighed deeply. "They did. The funding was pulled because some board members had investments in competing treatments. William was furious, but I never knew he continued alone." James leaned forward. "Is his research valuable?" "Valuable?" Dr. Fisher laughed softly. "It's revolutionary. William found a way to target cancer cells without harming healthy tissue. If this works as his notes suggest, it could change treatment for thousands of patients." Margaret felt tears forming. "My son didn't die for nothing." "Far from it," Dr. Fisher said, carefully closing the notebook. "Your son may have saved countless lives, but now we face the same problem William did, getting people to believe in this approach." "What do we do?" Margaret asked. "I have some independent funding. With your permission, I'd like to continue William's work, test his formulas in the lab." "Yes," Margaret said without hesitation. "That's what William would want." 6 months passed. Margaret received weekly updates from Dr. Fisher. The research was progressing well. Early tests showed promise. William's approach was working. One sunny morning, Margaret's doorbell rang. It was Elizabeth, who had barely spoken to her mother since the exhumation. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. Margaret stepped aside, surprised but happy. "Of course." They sat in the kitchen, the same room where Margaret had received William's letter a year and a half ago. "I saw the news," Elizabeth said, placing a newspaper on the table. The headline read, "Breakthrough Cancer Treatment Enters Clinical Trials. Named after late researcher William Taylor." "Dr. Fisher called yesterday," Margaret said. "The first patients will receive William's treatment next month." Elizabeth reached across the table and took her mother's hand. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I thought grief was driving you to do something irrational. It was hard to believe, Margaret admitted. But you believed in William, Elizabeth said. You always did. That afternoon, Margaret and Elizabeth visited William's grave together for the first time since the exhumation. The headstone had been updated with a new inscription. His work continues. Margaret placed fresh flowers by the stone. Your secret is helping people now, William, she whispered. As they walked back through the cemetery, Elizabeth asked, Do you think William knew his research would work? Is that why he went to such lengths to preserve it? Margaret smiled, remembering her clever, determined son. William never did anything without good reason. He knew what we would find. A year later, Margaret stood nervously at the edge of a stage. A medical conference room was filled with doctors, researchers, and patients. Dr. Fisher stood at the microphone. The Taylor treatment has now helped over 200 patients, he announced. Many are showing full remission of cancers, previously considered terminal. The audience applauded as Dr. Fisher continued. None of this would have been possible without the courage and determination of one woman. Please welcome Margaret Taylor, the mother who quite literally unearthed this miracle. As Margaret stepped forward, the audience rose to their feet. Among them were patients now living because of William's hidden gift. In that moment, Margaret felt William's presence stronger than ever before. His grave had indeed held treasure, not gold or jewels, but hope for thousands. The end.